do some really basics for the newer agents, but then we'll also get into some of the deeper questions for any of the more seasoned agents.
So I'm
Jess,
Jessica Hoxie. Yep, Jessica Hoxie from Movement Mortgage. I've been with Movement Mortgage since just had my 3-year anniversary actually, but I have been in the industry for about 10 years. So I did a lot on the processing side at first, and then when I made the switch over to Movement is when I made the jump to sales. So yeah, I recognize a few of you guys in here. Hello. But looking forward to, you know, meeting some new people and yeah, see what we can teach you today.
So for anybody that doesn't know that's joining us, this class actually started as an Ignite graduation class. So we know, I don't know if you guys want to say me or put it in the chat or whatever, are there any agents who have not had any closings yet that are in this group? So I see 2 hands. So Jen and Andrew, welcome. There are some people I can't see at all, and I don't even see the chat box doing anything. I don't know. Nicole, do you see anything that may be missing?
I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay, well, so we're going to assume, oh, okay, so Warren just responded me. So I think we have some newer agents, which is really what this class was intended for. But I think that, you know, there's lots of good information that even seasoned agents will get. And I also love the opportunity for seasoned agents to be able to help newer agents better understand, you know, kind of what we're talking about, because I think that agent perspective is really useful while you're getting the agent, while you're getting the attorney and the lending perspective. So we're going to just jump right into it because this is a brisk pace, and we can certainly talk offline. I know Jess and I usually give our cell phones at the end of this course to say, hey, if you want to reach us for anything, this is what we're here for. But we want to start with preparing the sales agreements. So for our new agents, have any of you yet prepared a sales agreement? Okay, so for the most part through production, if any of our newer agents have gone through that, great. If you have not drafted a sales agreement, I implore you not to go it alone. Make sure that you are getting somebody that has some experience in the office, whether it's someone in the training program or a mentor or just a seasoned agent. It's harder now because not everybody's just walking around the office able there to help you, but Keller Williams really does offer a tremendous amount of support. So I want to make sure that as our newer agents, you're feeling supported. And again, Jess and I are here as resources for you. That's really one of the goals of today, is just to familiarize you with what we offer and then how our roles kind of work together. So making sure that you're familiar with the sales agreement is going to be part of what we're talking about here today, and also making sure that you're able to properly draft that sales agreement. Again, it's something that you're going to be working on through your entire careers. So if you're in this very, very busy market right now, you probably have buyers already getting pre-approvals before they've gone out there to find a house, right? So assuming that they're one of the lucky ones and they find a house, what happens next? That's really what we want to talk about, is we want to understand as a new agent what those steps are going to look like. So Jess is going to talk to us a little bit about the loan application versus the upfront underwriting, which is a pre-approval that Movement does, which is very, very different, you guys, because not every lender does it the same. And that's one of the things that we're going to be highlighting throughout the day today.
Thank you. Yes. So what happens when I get an application from a borrower, I take all their information down, we get their credit pulled, and from there, that's where some other lenders stop. They go off of what the borrower says they've made for income. Obviously, you do have the credit report, so you can verify liabilities and the credit score, but you're not really verifying any of the other information like their income or their assets. So when you hear or if you see a borrower receiving a pre-qualification, that is what that is. That means that they have pulled credit and they've taken an application from the borrower, but they haven't actually verified anything. So we take it a little bit step further when we get a pre-approval. So that means not only did we take that application, but now I have their W-2s, I have their tax returns if they're self-employed, I have their bank statements, and I'm actually verifying all of this information so we can make sure that that matches up to what the application says. And honestly, it's a really important piece, because trust me when I say nobody actually knows what they make. I change the income from what people tell me all the time. They think they know what they make, but they don't. especially those self-employed people. So, and then at Movement, we take it a step even further. We'll actually have an underwriter look at that file before it goes live. So this can make a really big difference, especially in a tough market right now where everybody's competing for their offers to be accepted. When we have a pre-approval for Movement Mortgage, it means that you're going to be in good hands, that it has actually all the information has been verified, and I actually can call that listing agent that you're putting an offer in, and I can give them a call and say, hey, not only do I have not only these borrowers good, but I have verified all their income. They've been through underwriting, and really now it's just getting that house approved, and kind of put the listing agent at ease, knowing that this borrower has already been vetted out. So that's a big difference from, some other companies, especially the online companies. Really, like I said, people are just going in and they're just typing in their information, and they're spewing out a pre-qualification, and sometimes they'll call it a pre-approval, but it's not really. So that is a big difference between Movement and some other companies. So my recommendation as a listing, if you have a listing, it doesn't hurt to call that. To call those people, call the lenders on those pre-quals and pre-approvals and ask what kind of documentation that they have, because you'll be surprised to find out that, a lot of people are going to end up saying that they, I've pulled their credit and everything, but we don't actually do that until an offer is accepted. So,
and garbage in, garbage out, you guys. I mean, what Jess said, and I know she said it kind of quick because we do this all the time and we've got a lot of material, but their income is only as good as what they can prove and qualify for. So sometimes even if they are making a lot of overtime, if that's not technically something that can be used from a qualification perspective, that could be all the difference in them actually getting the mortgage, which is why going through the upfront underwriting process is so important. And you just really cannot trust a quote unquote pre-approval if it's not from a vetted source that you know.
And to kind of piggyback off of that, especially with COVID, now I have to ask every single borrower, did you work through COVID? Did you have time off? And it's okay in a lot of scenarios, if there is time off, it's explainable, but depending on the income, that could also lessen what they qualify for. So it's a really important question to be asking.
Absolutely.
Good afternoon, Melissa. Thank you
Hey,
for
John.
hosting. Thank you for hosting today.
Anytime.
I have a question for you, Jess. What is the difference between a pre-qualification and a pre-approval letter or notice?
So the main difference is the pre-approval means we have the documentation and we have actually checked those W-2s, those the bank statements. A lot of times I try to get a verification of employment if there's time, but if not, as long as you have that documentation, a pre-qual literally just means that they pulled their credit and that the borrower has told the loan officer how much they make. So that's what me and Melissa were just saying is, honestly, the borrower doesn't usually know what they make. They think they do, but and maybe it is what they make, but it's different when it comes to qualifying.
So what's more valid then is the pre-approval and not so much the pre-qualification, because
yes.
Because I believe some people get confused about those two elements.
Yes, and sometimes people will have a pre-qual in their hand and call it a pre-approval. They think they're pre-approved. You're right. It's used interchangeably, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest points, John. So thank you for reiterating that we want to drive home, especially to our newer agents, is that you cannot treat them the same, which is why a listing agent knows this about the Movement brand. And I definitely believe puts more stock in the pre-approvals that are accompanying the sales agreement offers. Plus, Movement can usually close a little bit quicker as a function of having a lot of that pre-underwriting already done, where some of the other banks just don't have that that option. Additionally, the listing agent having open lines of communication with the lender is also going to be really, really important. But in this market, when there's 5 or 6 other offers, the listing agent's probably going to go with the one that they know is tried and true, which is why as newer agents, I know it can be really uncomfortable to try to push your clients to a place of working with a lender that you trust and a lender that you know. But this is the reason, because it may give them the competitive edge that they need in order to secure the property. So that's something to be addressing with your clients. It's great if they want to work with Bank of America and, maybe Bank of America doesn't have time to look at all their assets and go through all of their income qualifications. So they just give them a pre-qualification. They're probably not going to get that. And the person at Bank of America is probably not going to be available to speak to the listing agent as readily to kind of field this out to make the sellers feel rest assured this is a solid offer. So those are the nuances that we wanted to bring up on the lending side of things. So Jess, assuming that they have the offer, right? It's been accepted. We know that we have to have, what's the one thing, you guys, that happens in the sales agreement pretty much all the time unless it's waived? You can yell it out, unmute yourself.
Home inspection or appraisals?
You're right, the home inspection. So certainly as the buyer's agent, you would be scheduling your home inspections for the buyers with them in order for the transaction to be moving forward, unless it's waived, to ensure that the property is what your client is intending to buy. But in the background, you're also going to be dealing with the lender about ordering the title and ordering the appraisal. So that's happening between Jess and our office, or Movement and our office, or whomever the closing attorney is. But a lot of times we have to give some deference to, well, when are the inspections going to be? And I know that Joanne jumped on the call, and I've had these conversations with her at various points. So as seasoned agents, you understand that sometimes we don't want to wait, or we cannot wait for the inspections to be completed because we have a really quick turn time. But there's other occasions where we may have a longer turn time for the sales agreement performance dates, and we want to give the buyer the opportunity to go through the inspection period so they're not spending the money on the appraisal costs if we're not sure the deal is going to hold together. So Jess, tell us about how that piece works out.
Yeah, so in general, usually when an agent's putting together an offer, the buyer's agent, they're going to talk to the lender, should be talking to the lender a little bit about the dates, because we're going to have a few important dates. Now, as you know, they have the dates of when the appraisal is going to be ordered, and they also have the dates of the mortgage contingency. So we'll dive into the mortgage contingency a little bit more in a minute, but those dates, obviously now they're really important to be following in the contract. So the first thing I do when first off, when the buyer agent is putting together an offer, they should be talking to the lender about what the lender thinks that they can do for those dates. Like Melissa mentioned, for the appraisal. So in general, as long as we're not, trying to do a really quick close or rescue or anything like that, I'm going to wait to make sure that those inspections are okay, and that the buyer is, going to be going forward with the deal before I'm ordering the appraisal. Or maybe I'll even hear, they are going to be going through the deal, but we're kind of working out some credits with the seller. So sometimes I'll hold off and I won't order it because we still have a little bit of leverage with the seller, because they know we haven't ordered that appraisal yet. So let's make sure we can get our credit, our $2,000 credit that we're trying to get. And then once that's all settled, I'll order the appraisal. So that's pretty much, and then right away I'll get the title ordered pretty much as soon as I can as well. I try to get that order in, so that way if there's any issues or if it's taking a little bit longer, that can be worked on, right away as well. In general, I always talk to the buyer, and the buyer's allowed to use however they'd like to use for an attorney, but kind of like what Melissa was saying before, you want to work with people that are well-known and you're comfortable with. So I do a lot of business with Melissa, and I do always try to, if the buyers don't have anybody and they're looking for a referral, I always try and send it to Melissa, because they know how to get the deal done. It's really good prices, and it's what she said earlier. You're not always can get a hold of people, but I know that with Melissa's office, if there's a question or if there's a fire, someone's going to be answering the phone, someone's going to be answering emails, and they're going to be working hard on it. But yeah, to get back on track, the really important dates are the mortgage contingency date. So we want to be hitting that mortgage contingency date. And so the reason you want to talk about that upfront with the lender is it depends on the type of loan on when we think we might be able to provide that. So for some of the newer people, I'm not sure if you're even familiar with the mortgage contingency date is, but on the contract, there's it's going to say that the buyer needs to provide a mortgage commitment by whatever date you set forth. We, as a lender, I am trying to wait as long as possible to give that mortgage commitment. I want to at least, if possible, have appraisal in. I'm definitely going through underwriting and make sure that you're approved and that there's minimal conditions. So even if I am approved from underwriting, but there happens to be, for whatever reasons, a self-employed borrower and there's a lot of conditions, I want to make sure that I'm cleaning it up and doing as much as I can on my end to make sure that when that mortgage commitment date is coming up, that I am ready to issue that mortgage commitment. once I issue a mortgage commitment, it is saying that the buyer is good on the mortgage side, just subject to certain conditions, but it's saying that they should be able to satisfy these conditions. So this matters because if I issue a mortgage commitment and something happens after the fact and the buyer's trying to back out for whatever reason, that's when that earnest money deposit that they give up front is now in danger of being lost.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's
just
another
a-
reason I try to make sure that we have the appraisal in as well. Most agents put in the person's sales that it is a requirement for it to appraise. But just kind of the safety net, I try to, if possible, wait for it to actually be received so we can make sure and address any issues then.
Jess, if I can just back you up for a second,
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the mortgage commitment deadline as well as the performance for the closing deadlines. Obviously, as you're drafting a sales agreement for, maybe the first time, you have to determine where are you getting those dates? And ultimately, it should be the lender. Whether your client chose the lender you wanted or you got stuck with the lender that, they were married to out west and you weren't loving, but it is what it is. You have to live and die by what that lender is telling you are going to be realistic turn times. Because in Rhode Island, specifically for the mortgage commitment deadline, you guys, which is different than other jurisdictions, so that's why it's so important, is that if you pass the mortgage contingency deadline and for whatever reason, the buyers cannot close as if they're not going to get the loan. I'm not talking about a delay. I'm just talking about if they cannot close, then they will be losing their deposit and they are going to point the fingers at you. So it's really, really important that you are familiar with what that timeline is and that you are making sure that it is going to be realistic and that you've memorialized it appropriately in the body of the sales agreement. Okay, so I don't know if there's any questions. I usually like to just kind of pause for a minute and see, especially if our new agents have any questions about the mortgage commitment timeframes, because you may or may not have the same familiarity of what's in the sales agreement as some of our seasoned agents that are on the call.
I've got a question. This might actually be helpful because my
Sure.
commitment is today. My mortgage commitment date.
This isn't
So
a hypothetical, this is a real.
this is actually going on. Good
Okay,
news. I'm closing with Melissa and I'm working with Movement Mortgage. So, I feel good.
so you're on the buyer's side, you've got a commitment due today.
Yep.
Okay,
We have the appraiser got COVID and he had to
Oh,
push it
geez.
back and he's going today to get appraised. So I'm working with sellers who we've talked briefly offline about this, Melissa. They're not quite the most honest people in the world.
yes.
So we have some concerns about, okay, should I just be getting an extension at this point? Because I have no idea if the appraisal is coming in.
So here's my first question, Andrew, and I don't remember because I don't have the files in front of me. Do you have a provision in the addendums section of the purchase and sales, paragraph 23, if it's a single family, that recites that the property is subject to appraising at or above the sales price? Do you know if that is in the body of your sales agreement?
It's a multi, but yes, it is that.
Okay, yeah, so that's why I mentioned the paragraph numbers might be different. So that language that Andrew has in the sales agreement is actually going to save him, because as long as the commitment is issued and it's still subject to the appraisal, because obviously the appraisal hasn't happened as a result of the COVID circumstance, then when the appraisal comes back, if it comes back low, the buyers are still going to be protected because of that contingency that you have in the sales agreement. Understand though, especially right now with how competitive it's been, a lot of agents will not include that kind of language in the sales agreement. They take out as many contingencies as they can because they want their buyers to look good. And that was the reason that Jess was talking about, we may need to have the appraisal done within the confines of the mortgage commitment. And if that's the case, you would have 1,000% needed an extension to the mortgage commitment. Andrew, you're working with Adam?
Adam, yes.
Yep. So we should check in with Adam and just make sure there's no other major issues that are open that would impact the commitment aside from the appraisal. I'm quite sure there's not, but again, I'm working off memory and I don't trust that. So I would just make sure that you double back with him. And if there are any other issues, like if they needed to get a tax transcript or some other thing that may impair the ability for the commitment or the timeline for the closing, then yes, let's get a extension to that timeline for the mortgage commitment. But if it's strictly the appraisal and we have that contingency language in the sales agreement in the addendum section, then you should be good to go.
All right.
Without
Perfect. Thank you.
Melissa, I have a two-part question, one for you
Sure.
and one for Jess. Melissa, can you just, for clarity, if we can just back up and rewind, you had mentioned that the buyers will lose their deposit if they cannot close.
If they're outside of their mortgage commitment and there were subject conditions.
And there
So if
was,
the mortgage commitment had conditions, let's say there was, 3 items on those conditions, one of which was the appraisal, and then the appraisal does not come back clean, and you didn't have that contingency that we just talked about with Andrew in the sales agreement separately,
and the
then-
third element, what's the third element?
and the buyers can't close. So
So
assuming
therefore
all of those contingencies cannot be met, then in that case, the buyers would lose their deposit.
They lose their full deposit.
Yes.
The other question, Jess, we know today that property values are getting inflated, pretty much. There's a lot of panic buying going on, a lot of crazy stuff going on out there. Are you experiencing any challenges from your appraisers to get spot on these valuations?
I have had some appraisals come in short, but honestly, it's been worked out either. Usually the agents are discussing it a little bit beforehand, saying, I know this offer is being accepted above list price, and kind of, it's being addressed a little bit beforehand. But and so if we do have an appraisal that comes in short, depending on how much a buyer is putting down, if they're putting down a good amount of money where there's a lot of equity in the property, then it might not make a difference. However, most of these buyers are not coming in with, $200,000 down. So for most buyers, it will end up being that because we're only gonna lend on what that property value is. So it does affect cash to close. And that's where we have to either have the seller come down to what the house is actually worth, or, the buyer has to bring the money, or they're gonna have to meet in the middle. I haven't had a lot of appraisals come in short, to be honest. I think what's happening is because these people are, say an appraisal comes in short. I had one that came in like $17,000 short. That money was back to the buyer. And now that means that there's a new comp available for that next sale that's down the road. So I think what's happening is these people are overpaying, but now these new appraisals have higher comps. So now they're being supported. So it's not as, I would expect more to be coming in short, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's actually not, knock on wood, it hasn't been too bad. And
Just to get closure to this, Jess, last year I had a successful transaction, it closed, but there was a similar issue or challenge with the appraisal. So potential problem. So I contacted the co-broke, and she said, John, you're not supposed to be discussing this with me. We're not supposed to be discussing, in the event the appraisal doesn't come in, this is improper. This is an improper conversation. And so, Melissa, is that really an improper conversation that we cannot discuss this element with the other broker?
I mean, I don't know precisely what your conversation was, John, but I think as agents, you have a pretty good handle on whether or not the property is likely going to appraise or not. I've actually gotten to the place where I've drafted language in sales agreements that contemplates if the property appraises between this price and this price, the buyers will bring X amount dollars over, the appraisal, kind of like what Jess was just prescribing. Or if it is between this price and this price, then the sellers will reduce the sales price. Or if it's between this price and this price, then the buyers can walk away. And obviously you can see how that would get really convoluted. But these are conversations that are happening at a routine place of negotiation right at the beginning of the onset of the transaction. So I find it strange. And I saw Joanne just put her video on. I don't know. Sounds like she wants to make a comment.
Well,
I just think that is crazy.
Yeah, I don't even understand what that agent's comment was about.
Well, let me just say this. That first agent that I'm referring to, her client did not get the property. Okay. Another client got the property from another agent. So she pretty much shot this thing down because she
So
did
you
not
were
want
the
to.
listing agent and you just anticipatorily said, hey, what if it doesn't?
I
appraise?
anticipated there was going to be a valuation issue, an appraisal issue.
And that's what I'm saying. You've got a sense of
And there
this
was.
stuff. Both listing agent and buyer's agent know what's going to comp out and what's not.
Listen, John, if you say to that co-broke, oh, don't worry, I'll get my sellers to take whatever, or the other co-broke says, oh, don't worry, I'll get my buyers to get extra money. That is not working in the best interest of either of your clients. However, if your focus is on how am I going to get this sold for my seller, and the co-broke is how am I going to get my buyer in this house, that's totally two different things. So I think that realtor, for whatever reason, she was going down a different road and not looking at the best interest of everybody. And you don't know what her experiences were, and somebody may have made a blanket statement, don't talk to the co-broke. But I think when everyone's acting in the best interest of their client for what the goal is, and you're not doing anything that's inappropriate, there is no reason why you cannot speak with the co-broke. You're gonna speak to the appraiser. Sometimes the co-broke may know of a sale that you don't know about because it was, and the appraiser doesn't go and search the extracts or whatever. So I think that was totally out of line. And I think that also indicates that you want to find somebody that's going to work better with you because you want the deal to close. Somebody like her, it might have been an awful transaction because it would have been an antagonist kind of situation to the whole transaction.
Well, she was from out of state and the appraiser was from Massachusetts. Did not know the neighborhood in Warwick. That's
Right.
all.
That could have contributed to the whole thing, John,
That's
frankly.
right. You did the right thing. You went with the right person, whoever you went with, because you went and you got to a closing.
And we got it done.
Good job,
Um,
John.
So I feel like we got a little bit off the title, but I want to come back to that. And I want to stick with the mortgage commitment because I think that's such an important part. So assuming that as a buyer's agent, you are getting a copy of the mortgage commitment from the lender directly or from your client, however you get it, it's really, really important that you guys are taking a look at it because you do not have to forward it on to the co-broke, the listing agent, to satisfy the mortgage commitment. Basically, if you don't get an extension, you don't get a denial, your mortgage commitment deadline is going to be considered lapsed. And at that point, that's where we were talking about your buyer's deposit is at risk or has exposure. So understanding what those conditions are within the confines of that commitment are really going to be important because now you need to make sure that your buyers are able to adhere to all of those conditions. And there may be some simple ones, right, Jess, like verification of employment. Everybody has that for the most part. But you may have some
Yeah,
that are a
clear
little more
title is always going to
complicated.
show up. There's going to be like these standard ones that you'll get used to, but you shouldn't receive, if you receive a commitment and it's 3-4 pages long, that should be a red flag right away because that means there's a lot of conditions. It really should be like a 2-page document. We got, stating all the stuff, and at the end is where the conditions are. And they'll keep, if they keep going and keep going, then it's not that clear of a file. But at the same point, you can always pick up the phone and ask the lender, do you have sometimes what happens is when a file is approved, it's approved with conditions. Now on my end, it's our job to collect the conditions. So we may have some of those conditions, but the underwriter just didn't sign off on them yet because we didn't send it back. So communication, once again, with the agent and the lender is very important because you want to be able to say, hey, this looks a little long, how do you feel about it? And then the lender can say, actually, we already have like 95% of the stuff. Like I feel good. And not be worried about it. But you do want to be reading those and making sure there's nothing scary in there.
And
And
I think that getting it in advance
Right.
helps, right, Jess? Because Andrew was just talking, he's got one that's due today. Like that's not ideal because now by the time you get it, you may not have the time to review it. So you always want to make sure that you guys are doing a good job of kind of diarying or calendaring whether or not, what your deadlines are and a few days in advance so that you're able to get those commitments in advance. Because what do you think you should be doing if you don't have a clean commitment? If you have one that's 5 pages long, what could you be doing to represent your client to minimize their exposure? Anybody?
Getting an extension.
Extending it.
Yes, we need an extension to that commitment. And it's not good enough to just put out the buyer needs an extension and sign an extension. The seller has to approve the extension, or you need a different type of addendum that says, we are requesting this extension. If you don't give it to us by this date, we're out. We want to get out of the contract, which again, right now your buyer may not be willing to take on the risk of losing the property because the market is so hot. They may prefer to risk losing the deposit. But again, that's a conversation that has to be very closely marshaled by the lender. Because if the lender's saying, yeah, I'm really worried about these conditions and I don't think we're going to be on time for certain things, now your buyer needs to understand, well, then I could potentially lose my deposit, but that's better for me. Maybe I'll just try to negotiate an extension to the contract date, the performance date, the closing date, opposed to losing this property and having my deposit safe because it's a smaller deposit or whatever the case may be. So it's going to be a case-by-case basis. There's really no one size fits all on any of this.
What I would recommend, this is what I do. When I get a purchase and sales, I open my calendar, I put in the commitment date, and then depending on, where it falls in the week, 3 to 4 or 5 days beforehand, I'm putting a note, hey, commitment's due in 5 days. Because that way I'm checking the file and I'm making sure, are we gonna be able to meet that? Is appraisal gonna be in? Do you have conditions? And then if I think I'm not gonna be able to meet that, I'm reaching out to the agent and saying, hey, can we ask for an extension? But it can work both ways. If you check in with the lender, especially if it's a lender that you don't normally work with too. So check in with them and say, hey, how are we looking? This is due in 5 days. Do you think you're going to be okay? Because like Melissa's saying, if you need an extension, you want to be asking for a couple of days beforehand, not, the day of. This obviously can still be done, just not ideal. So.
And in my experience, there's a lot of lenders where bad news does not travel fast. They actually tend to ghost you a little bit. So they may not be taking the approach of, hey, we're going to need more time. And if you are starting to get that suspicion that they're dodging you, then you should really be, putting up your extra layers of what to the client. Hey, what's going on? Have you talked to your loan officer? Have you talked to somebody there, the processor? Because we're starting to become increasingly concerned that they're not responsive. So we've talked about the mortgage commitment, generally speaking, although I don't like to make generalities. If we had to put a timeline, Jess, as to when the mortgage commitment will be relative to the contract closing date, what would you say it is?
I always try to put it as close to the closing date as possible. So I usually say a week before, 2 weeks before, depending.
Yeah.
But like I said, I personally, I try to want it to have as much as possible, including that appraisal. So I try to do about a week before. And then I know sometimes the listing side will push back and say, well, how about this? So that's what I try to do though.
Yeah, so I would say that the average rule of thumb is that depending on the turn time for your closing date, so if you were having a really short closing date of 30 days, then you're probably going to be looking at maybe a 7 to 10 day mortgage commitment. So 7 to 10 days before the closing date is when you get it. But if you're looking at a 45-day closing or a 60-day closing, then you're probably looking at more like a 14-day before the closing date is when that mortgage commitment timeline would be coming due. So just keep that in mind, you guys, because as you are approaching the commitment date, you probably are also going to be approaching a closing date. And then you need to be thinking about what other things do I have to do as an agent to advance this file to a closing? Because, right, that's the end goal. You all want to get paid. I don't think any of you are here volunteering. So that's what we're going to, kind of focus on. I do want to just sideline for a minute back to the title because it's very near and dear to my heart, if that's okay. So the title piece is going to be searched by the lender. And as Jess had alluded to before, in the state of Rhode Island, buyers have the right to choose their own title attorney. The banks cannot force them to pick a title attorney. The agents cannot force them to pick a title attorney. So you as the buyer's agent should really have this in your presentation materials to familiarize the buyer with the idea that they have the right to select an attorney and that they can talk to that attorney as much or as little as they want, relative to the transaction. You can make some referrals to them. They can work with somebody that whomever they want, but they really do need to be sort of specialized in the practice of real estate. It is not ideal when you're working with an attorney that doesn't do real estate all the time. They do a little criminal, they do a little divorce. You're always going to find more efficiency with those who are experts. And I usually just equate it to this. Would you ever go see a foot doctor for a heart surgery? Of course not. That's ridiculous, right? So even though attorneys may not be specializing in something, they may be general practitioners, you still want someone who has a strong familiarity in real estate and is also not going to be tied up in court and can, get to these title issues and things of that nature.
Melissa, I have a question.
Sure.
Based on what's going on with COVID, are some towns, city halls a little easier to work with? Who should we anticipate should get titles done earlier because of not having access, et cetera, et cetera? Can you comment on any of that?
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. So relative to the title, when the lender is ordering the appraisal to be completed, that's typically when they're also ordering the title with the closing attorney, whomever the buyer has selected. And that's at a very early point, right, Jess? When they do their initial disclosures, they have to identify the lender is picking it for them or they're picking their own. And then from there, the lender is going to send the title request to the closing attorney so that they can search the land evidence records. Now, under COVID, things have definitely been a little bit more challenging because many of the town halls are not in person. You have to make appointments to get in, or you're doing the searches online. And frankly, the online information is either just not as reliable or there may not be as much data. So for example, and I had this happen at the very beginning of COVID, the City of Providence online database only goes back a certain number of years. Well, my owner, I represented the seller in that case, owned the property before that time, subject to a deed that nobody could gain access to. So we just had to wait and wait and wait longer until we could finally get an appointment to get into the city to actually search the title. This happens a lot as well if there's any deaths in the chain of the title history and there's a probate that needs to be looked at, because a lot of times you can't see those probate records online. Sometimes the clerks will email the documents to you upon request. Other times you have to go and give them a check first, or they'll mail you the documents. It's just not as efficient. So to Joanne's point, title has definitely been taking a little bit longer. Although we used to try to get titles turned around within 3 to 5 days from the receipt, we are probably looking at closer to 5 to 9, depending on, how busy it is, depending on where it falls relative to the timing of the month, if it's a holiday, things of that nature. There are some increased efficiencies. If it's a really clean title, we might be able to get it back same day. And that does happen too. So it really kind of runs the gamut. I guess maybe 3 to 9 days would really be the bigger window I'd give.
What about in Providence, for example, with violations? I guess violation, I'm just asking that because I have something that just came up. So for the benefit of everyone, can you
Sure.
address that a little bit better or
So
more?
there's a housing code violation, Joanne, on the property, and you're just trying to figure out what the steps would be to go about clearing the violation, or is the buyer going to assume the violation?
No, the buyers are not going to assume the violation. It was an illegal apartment that was pulled out back in 2015. And supposedly nobody signed off on it. So it's one of those with $50 a day, forever and a day. And I call one department, so-and-so's not working. I talk to somebody else. They say it's not working. Oh, you're talking to the wrong department. And
I know.
I can't get a straight answer. And the title attorney said, you have all these things and I need books and pages because that's what they're asking me for. I'm just so fun for everyone's benefit. I hope you don't have to go through what I'm going through, but maybe Melissa, you can address it, that maybe it can be
I
expedited.
feel like it's always so curious, Joanne, that attorneys are always asking you for information that they should have otherwise had. I don't understand what happens in your world.
I know, I don't get it. Well, even the city hall is asking for books and pages.
So, violations as a general rule, you guys, is that if you're, and this kind of dovetails nicely, Joanne, so it's a perfect segue into what we're doing from a title review perspective. We're reviewing who owns it and what do they owe and what else has happened in the time they've owned it. So in Joanne's example, maybe the person has owned it since 2010 and they had one mortgage, but they had put an illegal in-law and somebody dropped a dime on them, whether it was a tenant that wasn't happy or a neighbor, a contractor that was, irritated and didn't get paid, whatever happened. Now the city is aware that there was an illegal unit in there. They slapped a violation on the title and they don't have clear title, which means they cannot convey unless they clear the violation, which could mean just removing the violation, like dismantling the illegal unit, or there could be a financial component to it, which are the penalties or some sort of compensatory piece to the town. Alternatively, the buyer could assume the violation. So in Joanne's particular hypothetical, we're saying that the seller has to clear those violations in this case. And the way to do it means they have to get in touch with the building official's office. And the building official's office was tough to get along with before COVID. So now with COVID, nobody's in there, everybody's remote. You just can't ever get a straight answer, as Joanne sort of alluded to. Honestly, Joanne, what I think works best, and if you need it, ping me. I usually email everybody I know in the building officials, sphere in Providence, because Kevin Mahoney is excellent. He is the building official and I have his personal cell phone, but he doesn't answer it and he doesn't respond. And I love the guy. He's really, really intelligent and a great building official, but I think he's just really busy. So it's important, kind of like to me, I get calls and emails all the time as the attorneys, but my paralegals are the ones working on the files right now while I'm teaching this class. Just like Jess has a loan officer assistant, like you need to include everybody on that correspondence so that you're more likely to get the information in a more efficient process, but it's an inefficient period, and COVID's just complicated it.
Let me say this. I had a similar situation last year, and Joanne, Kevin is a reasonable man, and many times you can negotiate
I
those.
can't even reach him. I can't even reach him.
That's the
reach-
problem. You've got to get the call set up. So I had to go through most recently one of his other people to set a scheduled call. And then
Yes,
once I got the scheduled call, it was like, all right, well, these are going to be our action items. And that particular one, it was for an agent at KW. They wanted a lead test, which hadn't been done in years. The agent set up a lead test. As soon as we got the clean lead, we sent it there. We got the release within a couple of weeks. I mean, none of this moves at the speed of light, but that's why I said it was inefficient and slow to begin with. Now it's a grind.
but get that phone appointment. Get that phone appointment with him.
I can
Well,
email,
I'm
I
glad
can
I
shoot
brought
you
it
his
up.
emails.
And I can't even stick the seller on him because the seller that I have is wonderful, but English is not his first language. So I have to do all of this and I'm
I was
getting,
gonna say, it sounds like the case, it sounds like they could really use seller's counsel, but maybe don't call me because now I know it's a nightmare.
I already told him that. I already told him that. He's like, oh, my attorney is so-and-so. I never heard of the guy. So, here we go.
But
Call me,
honestly,
Joanne. Call
Joanne,
me. Call
why
me.
isn't the seller's attorney clearing this? I mean, this is truly, you guys, and
The seller
reason,
attorney is sending it to me and saying, these are all the violations. You need to talk to the seller and get this resolved.
I
Hello,
don't believe that that person is doing their job. My guess is they're probably not a real estate attorney. And this is a really great real life example for all the newer agents on the call to understand exactly why that's frustrating. Because you as a brand new agent are like, well, how the heck would I know how to go about clearing that? Isn't that your job?
I'm not brand new and I'm having trouble.
I know, that's my point.
Yeah.
Oy vey.
All right, move on.
So
Thank
there's
you.
lots, thank you. It was a really good title clearing example that as the closing attorney, we would be responsible to work closely with the seller's attorney or the sellers directly if they didn't have counsel or the agents to try to get the transaction cleared up, because understand the sales agreement has a contingency for clear title. So irrespective of the mortgage commitment deadline, we have to have clear title in order to have a closing. And if we cannot get clear title, we obviously are not going to have a closing. There would presumably be an extension for the closing date pursuant to clearing up the title. So relative to lots and lots of title issues, you guys, and I think maybe it would make sense for us to spend time in a separate class, just kind of understanding some of those title issues, but Joanne gave us a nice real life example. So with the 20 minutes or so balance that we have, I want to really talk about focusing as the agent, what the agent's responsibilities are going to be to kind of move towards the next steps for a closing, unless we have any questions. So I just wanted to pause here quickly and see if there's any questions, because I feel like we've all been doing a lot of talking. No? Jess, anything you wanted to interject?
The only thing I wanted to add to when you were saying about the attorney does really matter. And a lot of times when the buyer says that they have someone, it's someone that they think that they can get a discount with. And it's exactly what Melissa said, is that it ends up being that's not even their main focus is real estate. Or sometimes like it's like a one-man show. So I just wanted to say that I have noticed a huge big difference when you're dealing with that type of attorney. They mean well. It's not like they're, it might not be a bad attorney, but they're just not experienced in that area. So then you do have situations where they're asking the agents or they're asking the lenders for things that they should be doing, or they just don't know the questions, or that turnaround time, that 3 to 9 days that Melissa has, that's not going to be the same turnaround time if it's a one-man show. So the only thing I did want to, piggyback is it's really important, just like who you're using for the lender, who you're using for the attorney, it's really, really important.
And it's really just like you guys, right? Who you're using for an agent, who you're using for a doctor,
Yep.
who you're using for a veterinarian, for your pets. Like, we're not all built the same, right? And I would say the average timeline is like 5 days, because that 9-day just makes me kind of nauseous. You guys
have been really quick lately.
When I
You guys
heard
have
it
been
back, I was like, oh,
sending
that's
them
too
over.
long. I don't think they usually are taking that long. In fact, we just had a ton come in February, and they all really got done pretty quickly. I think there was a little sell-off, so it actually helped because there wasn't as many purchases, so got the refis done quick. But anyway, that's a total digression. So once you're getting that mortgage commitment, whether you're a buyer's agent or a listing agent, you really should be thinking about, all right, we're about 1 to 2 weeks before the closing. What is it that the closing attorney is going to need in order for us to actually have a successful closing? And for me, it's all about, well, we need final financials, right? We need to know what are the mortgage payoffs for the sellers. We need to secure any final water meter readings and water bills, sewer bills. And when we're asking you guys for a final water meter reading, that's because that's what we're doing is we're transferring the service out of the seller's name into the buyer's names. So, and it takes a couple of weeks usually. Providence Water had been horrific in the light of COVID. They've actually gotten a lot better, much, much better. So Providence Water and Narragansett Bay are usually getting things turned around, I would say, in 5 to 7 days now, opposed to what was taking like a month before. But we need those final water meter readings. I know Joe Del Sesto, something he used to do is when he takes the listing, he would call the water authority and ask if the meter needs to be replaced. Because in the areas that are serviced by Providence Water, if the meter needs to be replaced, they won't give you a final bill until you have the meter replaced. You need to do it every 10 years. And then they basically hold the bill hostage until you get the meter replaced, which means in some cases, you can't even have a closing unless the closing attorney is willing to hold an escrow.
Yeah, for sure. Remember to do that. Put on your checklist. I do it all the time. We used to be able to get it done in a day, 2
Yeah.
days. Now you got to call and it's probably 2 weeks away, and you got to do that as soon as you list the property. And then that way you have the seller meet them, they take care of it, and it's one less thing you have that's on your plate.
I have a question. I have a question for all. Is anyone experiencing difficulties or challenges getting smoke certs from different fire departments, fire marshals? Anyone having?
John, I was just gonna bring that up. I've had multiple closings lately where on the buyer side, we're clear to close, we're ready to go, and no smoke cert. So it is happening, and it's almost like it's getting worse. It seems to be increasing.
Does
What can
anybody
we
know
do?
how long?
What can we do then to mitigate
Well,
this?
I was just going to ask, does anybody know how long a smoke certificate is good for?
Yeah, 120 days.
Yeah, that's a long time, right?
Order it.
So we don't,
Order it as soon as you list.
right. Even if you want to wait until inspections, Joanne, right?
Yep.
If you've still got a few weeks before the closing because you just got through inspections, order it then. You don't have to wait until the week or two before closing. And I think, John, that's what's creating some of this difficulty, which that was one of the items I wanted to address. If you're the buyer's agent, even though you're not going to secure the smoke certificate, it's going to come from the listing agent, presumably, right? And the seller, because it's their responsibility, unless it's a multifamily and you're taking the responsibility as the buyer, which is probably going to be a cash transaction only. Then in that case, you need to make sure that the listing agent is working on getting the smoke cert. And if they haven't, hey, is there anything you need me to do? Maybe I'm a newer agent. Maybe I can make arrangements to meet the fire marshal. I don't know if they would be comfortable with that. And technically the seller would have to approve it. But unless it's vacant, you just need to make sure that all the parties are working together as a team in order to move it forward. And I think, Joanne, that's one of the things I see so often with good co-broke relationships is it's not like, well, that's your responsibility. This is my responsibility. Everybody just wants to work together to get the closing done.
That's right. And you can always
so-
reschedule it. Don't forget, you can always reschedule it.
That's
If it
true.
comes in, you're only spending $30. It's not worth holding it up. They're gonna probably pay more for 1 day of interest than they are for the smoke detector.
And there's lenders that we cannot close without it. Right now during COVID, so long as the state of emergency is in place, we do have authority to not to close without a smoke certificate if it's a COVID related delay because the fire marshal's not getting out there, as long as we're holding an escrow. So we are doing that, but we're trying to avoid it, especially because I know some communities were actually doing the smoke certifications through video, where you take a video and you submit it and things of that nature, John. So I would say for everybody, the rule of thumb is as a listing agent or a buyer's agent, get it done early. And if you're the buyer's agent, ask the listing agent, have you done the smoke certificate yet? Is that something that maybe I can help you with? How can we go about doing it? Can we schedule the inspection on the same day as the home inspection? I don't know. Just trying to throw some options out there to keep things moving forward, because it will survive your buyer. If that buyer backs out because of inspections, how quickly do you think you're going to relist the property and get a new buyer like that?
That's
right.
right.
For the most part,
That's
most
right.
of the houses are going quick.
That's right.
Thank
Other
you.
things that you should be contemplating in these, especially right now in winter, would be closer to the closing date would be oil readings. If you have properties that are serviced by oil, then the sellers are going to be entitled pursuant to the sales agreement to be rebated for the fuel, whether it's oil, propane, that kind of thing. But you will need to have a certificate from the service provider identifying what the value is in that tank. So as a listing agent, something that you want to be talking about with the seller. As a buyer's agent, something you can remind the listing agent, hey, are we going to be reimbursing for fuels? We happen to notice the tank was pretty full. Do we have a certificate from Petro, or who's the servicer? Just so that way you're staying ahead of it.
Melissa, just for clarity, when we get those readings, is it market prices of the day, of that day, or is it the original cost of that oil?
It is market price as of the day the reading is issued, John. Yep. So sometimes that's advantageous, sometimes it's not. It just depends how long the oil's been in the tank, I suppose. Other things that you should be considering is preparing your smoke certificate. Not only as a buyer's agent, but most importantly, as a listing agent, we are going to need those smoke certificates right now during COVID. Commission bills, sorry, I think I said smoke certificate, but I meant to say commission bills. I am going to pay you at closing, as I alluded to before, but I cannot do it without an invoice to pay you. If there's any other negotiation items, whether there's been any credits or addendums to the sales price, if there's been any repairs that the seller needs to have paid out of the closing, get us those invoices. These are all those financial pieces that are going to be so crucially important. And because COVID is happening and we are not seeing the agents as much, you know, sometimes we're mailing off checks. Just make sure that you're having those communications with our office as early as you possibly can. And again, copy everybody that you know that's involved in a transaction, regardless of which attorney's office you're working with, because even at that, some people are still remote, some people are in the office. Jess, tell us about the clear to close. What does that mean? Because I feel like we don't hear that anymore.
Yes, the clear to close. Okay, so when we have all those conditions that were on that mortgage commitment, they're all satisfied. So we have everything that we need from the buyer. We have the title work in, clean title. We have the appraisal in, everything's good. We have the insurance. This is when we can submit and we can send in for the final approval. The final, once we get the final approval is when we can actually set up the closing and we can schedule. Now, it's an important piece to note. It's called the TRID rules. So that means that there's a closing disclosure. The initial one has to be signed by the buyer at least 3 business days before closing. Now, at Movement, what we do is once we have all the information that we need to send that. So for instance, we have the title back, which includes the taxes. Now that's going to go on there. So that's an important piece. We have the copy of the insurance binder. So we know how much their insurance premium is. We have all the pieces that we're now allowed to, for most programs, we don't need to wait for the appraisal to come in either, because we already know what that bill is. So we can send out this initial closing disclosure before we're actually submitting for our final approval, and we can get that signed and already have that 3-day waiting period all set. So then that way, if we get a clear to close and we need to close the next day, we're able to do that. But what you need to do is you need to be communicating once again with the lender and making sure that is how they operate, because there are certain programs and there are certain companies that wait until you actually get the clear to send out that initial closing disclosure. And even so, actually I should point out, Rhode Island Housing is going to be one of the ones it's a little bit different with the closing disclosure, but also they have this extra rule where it takes 48 hours for them to approve for the wire. So Rhode Island Housing, for any newer agents, it's a great program because it allows for 100% financing for the buyers, but it does take a little bit longer of a process. So to kind of loop it all back together to the beginning, when you're talking to that lender about a contingency date and a closing date, it's really important because they could be an FHA buyer, which in general, we can close in about 30 days. But if it's a Rhode Island Housing FHA buyer, you're going to need 45 to 60 days. So not only do you need that extra time for the loan approval, but once you get cleared, even if I have that initial closing disclosure signed, so our 3 days is satisfied, we have to still put the closing out about 3 days because we have to send that closing disclosure. What happens is when we get the clear, our closers at Movement and the attorney, so we'll work with Melissa and the paralegals, and we'll get the working on all those final numbers, the oil readings that you mentioned and the commissions, all that stuff is hashed out, and making sure we have all the right numbers on there. So once we have that information, we send that information to Rhode Island Housing and they have to approve the wire, and that can take up to 48 hours. So that's pretty much the only program where you really have to wait for that I know of, or that we do deal with anyways, for that extra time. But the whole point is it's just important because it can vary from place to place and from program to program. So just because you do have the clear to close doesn't mean you necessarily can close the next day. You have to still always have to be in communication about, where you are with everything.
Yeah. So when we hear that there's a clear to close, that's typically when we'll get in touch with the buyer's agent and start discussing the opportunity for scheduling. Now, in the old days, we would schedule all the parties together and we would all assemble and have a closing, and it would be a little bit of like a celebration. But now under COVID, everything is still being done in a bifurcated way, which sometimes happens before anyway. Buyers will meet with their attorney or closing attorney. Sellers will meet with their respective sellers counsel. If they don't have one, they'll meet with the closing attorney as well. We personally at our office are inviting agents to join. You just have to find out whether or not the closing attorney is approving for you to join or not. I would say it's about 50-50 whether or not the agents even want to come to the closings, because I'm finding with more frequency that agents are like, I don't really have to go there. My clients are in good hands. I've already seen the CD. We're in good shape. Or the ALTA settlement statement. So you just need to sort of be mindful of all of that. I would also say for managing expectations, anybody that's a listing agent, we usually are meeting as a seller's attorney with the sellers one day in advance. Because if my closing as the buyer's attorney is at 10 o'clock in the morning and the sellers aren't meeting with their attorney until 4 o'clock that same day in the afternoon, because that's what their schedule permits, well, now there's no way for me to record. Right. And although the recording and the way that the transactions being dispersed is a little bit different, I still need a signed deed. I still need all the parties to sign the transaction within that confines of the business day. And I still need the money. So that kind of ties back to what Jess was just talking about, was the funding or the wiring from Rhode Island Housing. Because understand, if we're going to have a closing, I'm basically as a closing attorney going to serve as a money launderer. The money comes in from the respective banks. We pay out all of the debts that are associated with the transaction, including your commission bills. And then at the end of the day, whatever's left goes to the seller. That's basically the way that this entire transaction works. And any difference, the buyer is bringing themselves in certified funds, either bank check or a wire. So make sure that as an agent, you're preparing your buyers that they will need to have certified funds. If they don't know the number, call the attorney, call the lender. We can give them estimates if necessary, because sometimes these things can come in a little bit hot and banks are closed. I just had a client the other day came in, he thought he was going to write me a check for $120,000 personally. And I educated him about that's unfortunately not going to happen. So I sent him to Bank of America down the road. Unbeknownst to me, that particular branch is now closed because of COVID. So he had to drive to like South Kingstown or something to find one, because East Greenwich is closed and now North Kingstown was closed. They might be reopened now, I don't know. But again, it just takes a little bit more preparation than it may have done a year ago, right? Or 2 years ago, where you just show up to the bank on the corner and you get a bank check and you go to the closing 10 minutes late. It's just not that simple anymore.
Melissa, a question, not to complicate this process, but would this protocol be pretty much the same for out-of-state buyers and sellers?
So you mean if they're not in state for the closing itself, John?
Well, that, or just they don't have residence, legal residence in Rhode Island.
Yeah, certainly the non-resident status is absolutely something that you should be addressing with your sellers up front when you're taking the listing, and making certain that they potentially hire an attorney, because again, these are going to be added layers of complexity that the closing attorney may or may not even deal with. If you have buyers who are out of state and they may not be present in person, again, movement will allow for power of attorney if they can't be here in person. Not every lender will allow a power of attorney, or potentially we need to schedule a mail away closing. All things that are going to take a little bit of planning and upfront preparation. So you want to make sure that you're, kind of understanding your client's expectations.
That's good information. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know we're going to be wrapping up here. I don't know if there's any kind of leftover questions. Joe Del Sesto does have a CMA class tomorrow at noon. So hopefully all of you can jump in on that, because that's certainly going to continue helping you in building your experience on how to comp these properties, something that we've certainly talked about a lot today. And, just to kind of close, and again, if there's any questions, either put it in the chat or unmute yourself and go for it. But we need to make sure that we have all of the signed parties, all of the cooperations from the agents, the buyers, the sellers, the attorneys, so that we can move these transactions and march them down to the end. And under COVID, I think everybody has done really a remarkable job in making sure that things are happening as close to on time as we can. Commission bills were being mailed and those were dreadful. So now we're recommending that you pick it up. For the most part, I think that's all been worked out at this point. But the signed settlement statement, which is really what kind of memorializes what's happened between the parties in the debits and credits, is something that we are doing with the buyers and sellers, but again, individually. So the closing attorney is the one who's responsible for circulating to you as the agent those signed documents, because if you have a commission check, that's lovely, but you're not going to get paid until the office has proof that it's been completed. And that's what the office is going to need, is a signed ALTA, a signed CD from the seller, if that's all you can get. So make sure that you are requesting those documents. I can tell you that most attorneys, our office included, we're emailing that to all of the agents and all of the parties in one foul swoop. Hey, this transaction is now complete. Here's a fully signed copy of what just happened. So you should be getting it as a matter of routine, certainly if it's my office, but if you're not getting it and it's the day after the closing, that would be a good time to ping the attorneys. Any questions, any comments, anything that you guys want to ask about?
Yeah, for Jessica. Jessica, if a appraisal comes up short, you're saying that the buyer can bring money to closing. What if it's FHA, VA, or Rhode Island Housing?
Yep, they can still bring, if they have the funds, then they're allowed to bring the extra money. It's just a matter if they want to. Because we're going off of what the appraisal value is. So that's their down payment is based off of that appraisal value. So if the purchase price is higher because it came in short, then that means that they would have to bring the difference.
Remember,
Or negotiate or something, you know, the seller's willing to come down.
Remember, everyone, you can always appeal that appraisal. You can always order an appraisal report from another organization. Is that true? Is a true statement?
Well, there's certain guidelines to that, but yes. So if there is comps that you think that the appraiser didn't use that they should have, then we can submit a rebuttal and provide those comps and say, hey, you know, if we use this, you know, we could bring up the missing value. It's very lot, you know, this comp is right down the street and it's very similar and you missed it or whatever it may be. Same thing for, I've actually had a couple multi-units that came short with rents recently. One was in Providence and one was in Woonsocket. And, you know, the rents can really vary over there just depending on everything. But for both of them, we were able to find other comps and submitted it to the appraisal and we're able to get those increased. So there are, if you truly think that that appraisal should have come in higher and that you have something to support it, then like John said, you should be able to rebuttal that and get that looked at again.
So Jess,
that's
how much time does it take and how often would you say it's successful? Because I feel
Yeah,
like
exactly.
I don't hear a lot of success stories.
I don't
on
either.
appeal.
That's what I was gonna comment. Yep.
Yeah, it has to, I mean, it has to be a good, it has to be a good comp. And, you know, it could be something that kind of like, I think I had one recently, it was for sale by owner, but the appraiser happened to actually do that appraisal. So they knew about it. So there's certain instances where they might miss like comps. So you can provide, but the turnaround time, they're supposed to have, I think it's 48 hours from when you request to answer. Now, the things with the appraisers is there's deadlines, but they don't always follow them, as you might know. So there is a deadline. They're supposed to do that and review it and get back to you. But it really is just going to depend on, you know, they might come back and say, yeah, that is, but I did see that comp that you're mentioning, but I didn't use it because X, Y, and Z. And they're going to come back and give you the reasons of why. So it really is just kind of case by case.
Well, the other piece is where in the timeline of the overall transaction is this happening? Was there the contingency that we talked about before in the sales agreement that allows for the appraisal to be completed? If not, and you're really close to your mortgage commitment deadline and the listing agent has already sort of intimated they're not going to extend, and you know, we know they may have higher offers in the wings, it really can be a challenge here. So.
Well, I think that there would hopefully be an option or the possibility of adding language to that statement in the event that it's challenged, the appraisal is challenged. What do you think of that idea?
Adding what language? Oh,
Well,
you mean to the sales agreement?
The contingency, yes.
I mean, right now, John, the difficulty is the more contingencies you add, the more difficult these buyers look. And that's where, as listing agents, those buyers are tending to be passed over for the, you know, little contingency buyers. And that's where, you know, you've just got to come to that determination with your client as to how much protections do they need, what kind of risks are we thinking, how likely do we think it is that this property won't comp out, you know. So that's why I said before, it's a really tough time because it's very case by case specific. I can't give a lot of generalities, but certainly we could always add language.
That's a good point. Thank you. That's
Yep.
a valid point, not to complicate it. You're right.
Yeah. Well, I know we're a little after 2 now, you guys. So if there are other questions, I think Jess and I are available. Jess, I'm going to put in the chat box all of my contact information. So I'm sure Jess can do the same. So if
Yes.
anybody wants to reach us, are there any questions in these last couple of minutes?
Thank you guys for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Well
Now, for our
done.
seasoned agents, was it worth it? Did you learn anything?
Always. You always
Well
pick up a
done.
little
Well
something
done.
or
Good,
something's confirmed.
good. That's always what we want, so.
Mhm.
The only thing I'll say about to the new agents, don't let this all overwhelm you. There's a lot of people around that can help you. I mean, because it can be a little overwhelming, because you guys are like flying through the information. We were rebutting with different things, and this is just a business you have to learn, but take it one day at a time and don't get overwhelmed.
So
Yeah, and I
important,
have
great
no-
advice.
Yeah, and I have no problem answering any questions. There's so much to mortgages, there's so many quirky situations too. So always feel free to reach out, and just run by a scenario and hopefully I can help. And if not, I'll get you the answer. We'll find it.
Even if we're not involved in the transaction, I know I speak for myself as well as Jess, it's always a little bittersweet. We prefer that we're working with you on your transactions, but if you're just not sure about something, we're here as a resource. That's part of our value add. That's what we're here for. So, well, thank you guys all for your time, although I didn't see all of your faces. Some of you kept quiet under wraps, but thank you again for joining. It was really great to see those of you who we could and just to have all of you here. Hi, Carol.
Much.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Jess.
Have a
Thanks,
great
guys.
day, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, Jess. Bye, Melissa. Bye, everybody.
Bye, John.
Bye.